You ever been on one of those quiet car rides with a parent? Maybe you're driving them home or to the airport, and you just glance over, and for a split second, you see them not just as your parent, but as a person who's getting older. It's this sudden, sharp feeling, right? It's something we rarely say out loud, but we all feel it. Well, today, we're going to dive right into that exact moment.
We're going to start right here with this incredibly raw, unfiltered image from the poem My Mother at 66 by Kamala Das. I mean, that is a gut punch of a line, isn't it? The vulnerability of it, comparing her own mother to a corpse. That's the kind of thought most of us would try to push away immediately. And that really brings us to the big question for this explainer. Why does this private, painful thought from a poem hit so close to home for so many of us? Well, the answer, it turns out, is this really fascinating mix of art and some pretty solid science.
Yeah, that jolt of fear the poet feels, it isn't just a literary tool. It's like an emotional data point that scientists have been digging into for decades. It taps right into the very foundation of who we are, psychologically, our relationship with our parents. So let's start with the science. There's a ton of research out there, like a huge study from the UK's National Survey of Health and Development that has literally spent years tracking how these early bonds play out across our entire lives.
A lot of this research kind of boils down to two key ideas. On one side, you've got what they call parental care. You know, that warmth, that affection, feeling supported. And on the other side, there's psychological control, which is when parenting feels intrusive or manipulative. And these aren't just vague feelings, they are things researchers can actually measure.
And here is the absolute kicker from all that research. The balance of those two things has a direct measurable effect on our mental well-being. Not just when we're kids, but all the way into our 60s and even beyond. It's like a lifelong echo.
Okay, so with all that in our back pocket, let's bring it back to the poem. We can actually use these scientific ideas as a lens to really understand what's happening inside that car, turning the poet's words into a kind of emotional evidence.
So, after seeing her mother looking so fragile, what does the poet do? She immediately tries to distract herself, pushes the thought away. She looks outside at all these symbols of pure life and energy, sprinting trees, happy kids. This is a classic psychological move we all make.
And this just lays it out so clearly. You've got this stark contrast. Outside the car, the world is bursting with life. But inside the car, in her head, she's wrestling with the exact opposite, the fear of aging, of loss, of death. It's this massive internal conflict.
This moment is a perfect illustration of what psychologists call emotion regulation. Basically, our ability to handle tough feelings. And here's the link. Tons of studies suggest that how well we do this is heavily shaped by our early parenting. A childhood with lots of that parental care helps us build the tools to process these hard emotions.
But of course, the distraction doesn't last. At the airport, that fear comes rushing back, and this time she gives it a name. That old familiar ache, my childhood's fear. This one line tells us everything. This fear isn't new. It's a feeling she has carried since she was a little girl.
And you know what? Science has a name for this too. It's called attachment theory. The basic idea is that our very first relationships create a kind of blueprint for how we deal with security and fear for the rest of our lives. That familiar ache she feels, that's the old blueprint getting reactivated.
And look, this isn't just a theory. The hard data backs it up. The Stafford study, for example, found that high parental care is consistently linked to better well-being across a person's entire life, and high psychological control linked to poor well-being. So that ache the poet feels, it reflects a deep, scientifically observed pattern.
So let's get to the poem's ending because it's pretty haunting. It's all about this huge, silent gap between what we feel inside and what we're actually able to say out loud. You know, scientifically speaking, trying to measure how parents and kids communicate is incredibly tricky. A big review by researchers like Zaf shows that they have to use all these different frameworks, from attachment theory to something called family systems theory, just to try and understand what's being said and, more importantly, what's not being said.
And the poem just breaks down that final goodbye perfectly for us. First, she looks and sees her aging mother. Then, she feels that deep old fear. But what does she say? Something simple, something hopeful. See you soon. And what does she actually do? She just smiles.
That repetition of smile and smile and smile, it is so powerful. It's not a happy smile, right? It's a performance. It's a shield. It's a way to hold back this overwhelming fear that she feels she just can't speak out loud. Maybe for her own sake,
and maybe for her mother's.
So what do we get when we put a beautiful poem side by side with decades of scientific data? Well, we get a much, much deeper understanding of both.
In just a handful of lines, Kamala Das manages to capture the absolute core of a phenomenon that science has spent years and years trying to measure and define. She basically gives a human voice to all those data points about attachment and emotional regulation.
And on the flip side, the research validates her personal experience. It tells us that this familiar ache is real, it's significant. It confirms that building relationships on care and warmth isn't just some fluffy, nice idea. It is a fundamental building block for a healthy life.
Which kind of leaves us with this final thought. The poem ends with a smile that's hiding an entire universe of unspoken feelings. And it makes you wonder, in our own lives with the people we love the most, how do we bridge that same gap between that familiar ache we all feel and the difficult words we sometimes struggle so hard to say?